Known by early travelers as Mongalo, the village of Mongalo is in the current Mtwara region in southern Tanzania. The village consists of nearly 2,000 residents, with Makua and Makonde people constituting the majority population. The economy of the village is based on farming, fishing, and animal keeping. Historians have paid attention to Kilwa, Bagamoyo, and Zanzibar as the only coastal city-states whose history also ought to be remembered. For a holistic understanding of the history of Tanzania and the coastal city-states that have not been paid attention to, Mongalo is also an ideal place because it challenges the existing knowledge about the place of coastal city-states and the French activities along the Indian Ocean and southern Tanzania as also a place that we should also direct our attention to.
Mongalo is significant and deserves a place in our history books. It is the only place that the French secured a foothold on the East African coast and maintained a presence for a number of years.
When we talk about the slave trade in the southwestern Indian Ocean, we need to distinguish between two basic periods. Before 1769, when the trade is very much influenced and shaped by the Compagnie des Indes. After 1769 and the beginnings of free trade, we enter a period in which there is considerable activity by a wide range of players. Frenchmen, but also Americans, Arabs, Dutch, Portuguese, so that it becomes a large-scale industry which results in the importation of tens of thousands of slaves into both Mauritius and Réunion.
Quand Louis XV reprend l'administration des îles de France et de Bourbon, il rétablit la liberté de commerce dans les Mascareignes. Cela va provoquer une vague d'immigration de négociants français. Mon ancêtre Nicolas Hilaire Comarmont fut l'un des premiers négociants à venir s'installer à l'île de France en 1771. Il était d'origine lyonnaise, il avait 34 ans. Il se fit rapidement un nom dans le commerce de Port-Louis. Il négociait avec les comptoirs de l'Inde et de la côte orientale de l'Afrique.
In 1785, the French government, under the orders of Comte de Rossilly, ordered an expedition in the northern Indian Ocean as well as the western Indian Ocean. The aim was to establish diplomatic contact along the coast, but also to find slave trading posts to supply not only the Mascarenes, but also Saint-Domingue in the Caribbean. On the 10th of January, 1786, Commandant Saunier de Mondeville arrived here for the very first time in Mongalo aboard La Prévoyance. La Prévoyance was a French king's corvette, armed with 30 cannons and carrying a 30-man crew. In his memoirs, Saunier de Mondeville recounted that the villagers told him this was the very first time a ship of this size had ever entered the Bay of Mongalo. During this encounter, the French flag was raised on board La Prévoyance. We can safely say that 240 years ago, the first French contact was established with the village of Mongalo.
Alikuja mtu mmoja mvumbuzi wa kwanza akiitwa Makonela. Hapa wenyewe hasa huyo Makonela alikuwa amepaita kumwalu. Wale shughuli zao zile kawavutia kwanza ni kilimo, ufugaji, na walikuwa sana wanatega sana wanyama, mitego ya wanyama. Ndipo akaja Mwarabu. Waarabu waliomba kwa sisi tunataka kuishi hapa. Baada ya kufika wale Waarabu, shughuli yao kuu ilikuwa ni biashara. Walikuwa wanauza nguo na wanafanya biashara ya kununua watumwa. Mgao aliyekaita ni huyu Mwarabu, kutokana na mashua zao zilikuwa lingine zinaenda Msumbiji na lingine zinakwenda Mombasa. Jina la mgao ilikuwa ni mgao wa kupita wa kusafirisha wale watu. Wale walikuwa wanawasafirisha kuwatoa hapa kuwapeleka sehemu nyingine. Wengine hapa ilikuwa ni sehemu ya kusafirisha. Sasa huwezi ukajua walipelekwa nchi gani na nchi gani. Na Mwarabu aliyekuja aliitwa Mwinyi Mwanya, kama alikuwa ndio yeye au yeye alikuwa ni msimamizi, ndio aliyejenga yale magofu.
In his memoirs, Saunier de Mondeville described the village of Mongalo as he saw it from the sea. In this whole village, he could only see one stone building, painted in white lime. This was the governor's house. Today, 240 years later, I am here standing in front of this very same structure. During the week he stayed here, Saunier de Mondeville made a survey of the Bay of Mongalo. He also created a detailed map of the village of Mongalo, in which the governor's house is clearly visible.
Kwa jina naitwa Hamisi Mwanya, mzaliwa hapa kijiji cha Mgao. Mababu zetu walitueleza kwamba hili jengo lilikuwa limejengwa na Mwarabu. Sababu lazima niseme jinsi walivyotuambia. Lilijengwa na Mwarabu, na huyo Mwarabu alikuwa anaitwa Mwanya. Huyo Mwanya ilikuwa anawanunua watumwa kutoka bara anawaleta hapa, na hapa alikuwa anawasafirisha kuwapeleka Unguja kibiashara zaidi.
I would like to assume that this site is actually 12th century. And also there is monumental remains that are inscribed with that particular period. The site is actually very rich. It has remains of a mosque, nearly complete, because you can see the building of the mosque. You can also see the well, and also can see the Qibla. So much as the roof is no longer there, parts of it are collapsing, but the major features of a mosque are visible. But also there is monumental remain with, maybe it has about 5-7 rooms, with Swahili architecture, such as doors, the roofing style. These are all still visible on site. So as my interest was in the French slave trade, and especially the fact that it's completely not remembered by the descendant communities that are still occupying the site, my interest was to try and trace that. Generally speaking, the beads and the porcelain are the evidence of the French slave trade in the site. These have not been dated and say for certainty that these are from the French contact, but already there is evidence of a European encounter with the site.
The governor of Mongalo, who was also the brother of the Sultan of Kilwa, welcomed Saunier de Mondeville and his crew by offering goats, chicken and fruit. The two men also signed an agreement. In this commercial treaty, the French would obtain monopoly of the supply of high-quality European goods to Mongalo. In exchange, they would obtain ivory and slaves at a very competitive price. Permission was also granted to the French to build an outpost at Mongalo to establish their presence on the Swahili coast.
There are obviously very powerful economic incentives for people to engage in this kind of traffic and to supply the demand for chattel labor, which is required both by a developing plantation economy and by the fact that the Mascarenes are an important center for maritime commerce and trade in the Indian Ocean world as a whole. If you invest in a slaving voyage during this period, you are oftentimes guaranteed somewhere between 25 and 35% return on your investment. And in some instances, there are indications that some of these voyages return 100% or more to their investors. A wide range of people who are inhabiting the islands see this as a surefire way of making money.
Following the first French contact in 1786 with Mongalo, the village attracted the attention of Nicolas Hilaire de Comormont, French merchant based in Mauritius.
En 1789, mon ancêtre offrait d'ouvrir le comptoir de Mongalo à ses propres frais, à condition qu'il soit remboursé d'une partie de ses frais par l'État.
Comormont funded the cost of the construction of a wooden warehouse, as well as the cost of maintaining his ship, La Bonite, in the Bay of Mongalo. La Bonite had a crew of 12 men and was armed with 4 cannons. One of the tasks of his crew was to keep the French flag hoisted in order to show the French presence at the entrance of the Mozambique Channel. Another of the tasks of the crew was to undertake a survey of the surrounding regions. One of the results of this survey was the creation of an updated map of Mongalo and its surroundings. As from 1786, 7 other ships entered the Bay of Mongalo to trade in food products, gums and resins, cotton and slaves. Comormont was so committed to this project that he even named one of his ships Le Mongalo.
La Révolution française fit avorter ce projet. Et en plus, Nicolas Hilaire fut assailli par les difficultés. Il perdit plusieurs de ses navires. Le 29 mars 1790, mon ancêtre Nicolas Comormont est mis en faillite. Il mourut 2 ans plus tard à l'île de France.
The site is not part of the Tanzania registry or record of monuments. And so it is not taken care of. The inclusion of Mongalo or Mugao site into the record of the slave trade routes of UNESCO, of any other category, in terms of recognizing and honoring the participation of small communities, of small states. Because when we come to slave trade activities, we don't want to say, like in Mugao, the memories of the French have disappeared completely. So we don't want to have a record of Mugao with the Arabs only, while we are sure that the French also participated. So we want it as a record to be a very well recorded piece. And so having it in the documentation will be important for telling the story of slave trade in its totality without leaving behind some aspects.
It is therefore important that we also directed our attention to studying the role of Mugao and its place in shaping communities along the Indian Ocean. So for historians who are therefore interested in looking at the Indian Ocean, looking at oceanic connections and creation of communities, Mugao is also an ideal place.
According to our research, the last ship to have arrived in Mongalo was Le Scipion in 1790. It left Mongalo with 264 slaves on board. It arrived in Port Louis, Mauritius in November 1790. Only 185 slaves had survived the journey.